I would like to extend a warm welcome to all members of the Environment and Sustainability Overview and Scrutiny Panel, officers, members of the public and press in attendance today at the meeting of 16th June 2022. Welcome to those who may be watching the meeting live on YouTube. I'm Councillor Steve Rippon-Swain, Chairman of the Environment, Sustainability Overview and Scrutiny Panel. Please note that this meeting is being broadcast live on the Council's website and on YouTube. It will remain available for a minimum of 12 months, and I'd like to remind those in attendance to use your microphone when speaking, and remember to switch it off once you have finished speaking. Also, please switch any mobile devices onto silent setting for the duration of the meeting. For the benefit of those watching on the media online, I will invite each panel member to introduce themselves. All other members present will have their attendance recorded in the minutes of the meeting. Now for panel members, Councillor Alan Glass.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Andrew Gossage. Not present. Right, Stephanie Osborne.
Present, Chairman.
Thank you. Tony Ring.
Present, Chairman.
Okay. And I think Derek Tipp is not here.
He's just arrived.
Derek.
Present, Chairman.
Good man. Made it. And last but by no means least, Councillor Malcolm Wade.
Present and good afternoon, Chairman.
Good afternoon, Malcolm. Thank you. And at the top of the tree, Councillor Sue Bennison.
Present, Chairman.
Right, apologies for absence on the agenda. Karen.
Hello. We've received apologies for absence from Councillors England and from Councillor Bellows.
Thank you. Item declarations of interest. I'm going to ask members whether they have any interests to declare. Do so now, or if you recall later on during the agenda, please raise it with us. Sorry, Malcolm.
Chairman, well, I'm a county councillor, and as we all know, the county council is the disposal authority, but it doesn't necessarily present any problem with talking about the collection of waste.
No trouble at all. Thank you, Malcolm. Right. Item 3 is public participation. I have 3 members of the public present who wish to speak on the next agenda item. I believe actually that's reduced to 2 now. On the next item, which is waste. Procedure for public participation on agenda items. Members of the public will be invited to speak first. I will then invite officers to introduce the report, and after this, we'll invite members of the panel to speak. Followed by other members of the council. Public participants will not be able to speak during this time. Right. I will now invite the public participants to address the panel, and I believe there are just 2 members of the public who wish to speak, Mr. Lewis Hibbard and Mr. Ralph Kent. Is that correct? Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. And I understand of the 2 of you, of course, as objectors to the recommendation, you're allowed 3 minutes between you, and that Mr. Lewis Hibbard, you will take 2 minutes, and Mr. Kent will take 1. Who wishes to speak first? Mr. Kent, please proceed. You have 1 minute.
Good afternoon. NFDC has created the myth that wheelie bins are necessary for increased recycling. Some statistics from 2021. NFDC's recycling rate using clear bags and crates was 34%. The best recycling rate in England was St Albans at 64%, and they use wheelies. Southampton also uses wheelies, and its recycling rate was 29%. The best recycling rate in the UK was Pembrokeshire at 73%. Pembrokeshire doesn't use wheelie bins, but a system of durable sacks, crates and caddies. By 2025, Pembrokeshire is targeting a curbside recycling rate of 75%, whereas NFDC is targeting just 55% for curbside recycling. To improve short-term performance in the near term, food caddies are a low-cost, low-risk way to boost recycling rates in the region and reduce animal attacks on black sacks. NFDC's waste strategy will affect this region for decades. Let's not waste vast amounts of taxpayers' money and tons of virgin plastic on replicating a flawed system simply because it exists elsewhere in other poorly performing Hampshire local authorities. Let's get this right now, follow the best practice, and hit a target of 75% as opposed to 55% by 2025. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gunn. Mr. Hibbert, please.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
NFDC's plan to introduce wheelie bins will have many issues for residents regarding the storage of the containers at their properties. Not all residents are blessed with outdoor space to house these containers. A major percentage of the properties will have to store the containers outside of their property, more than likely on pavements blocking safe passageway. This form of storage also has health and safety risks. In inclement weather, the bins potentially being blown down the street into the path of oncoming vehicles, causing damage. A quick question to the panel is, if the bins are owned by New Forest District Council and a bin does hit a parked vehicle, for example, who would be liable for the repairs to the vehicle, please? Wheelie bins left out during the day, pre or post collection, whilst residents are at work, will create an easy target for crime, as it will show that the properties are vacant. I feel this will increase the local crime rate that is already currently spiralling out of control. I've read in the proposed strategy that the current green waste bag system will be replaced by a further larger wheelie bin. I feel that residents will cancel their subscriptions for the green waste that they currently have because they purely cannot fit another bin on their site, and this will result in them hiding green waste into your general waste wheelie bins. The green waste, staying as it is a good way of boosting the current recycling rate. And also, if people cancelling their subscriptions will lose NFDC's thousands of pounds in annual revenue, which they currently get. I noted in a letter from one of the members, Councillor Julian Lewis, during a survey carried out by his members in 2006, it showed 60 in favour, 127 for opposed to wheelie bins. This cannot be ignored. NFDC have also carried out a survey on the strategy, which I can only describe as poorly advertised as well as conducted. The actual question content of the survey was heavily weighed in favour of the strategy and no real way to portray opposition. There were more questions on recycling rather than the actual implementation of how the recycling was going to work. I'll just end quickly on the vehicles. Myself, I work as a transport manager, so I'm very CO2 vehicle emissions focused in my role. I hold it close to my heart. When we have a collection of vehicles moving house to house, picking up and lowering 2 containers at a time, the traffic build up behind this vehicle is unimaginable, let alone the emissions being emitted by the traffic, which is also blocked behind the vehicle as it makes its way down the road, and also it will create terrible congestion within built up areas, I feel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hibbert. You had a little extra, but I think you wanted to say it. Thank you very much. Thank you both. Thank you, gentlemen. For practical purposes, right, we have actually received as a panel a letter from a person who couldn't be here, and it was delayed in being received by officers. But its contents basically were, it was from an Elizabeth Dennis, a resident of Rushington Manor Estate, who raised an objection in relation to wheelie bins, raising concerns about vermin, smells, overflowing bins looking unsightly, as well as the problems with the elderly who have to move those bins. Just be noted that that letter was received and has been presented to the panel via email. Right, now could I ask Chris Noble, please, as the officer concerned with the subject, to present his report.
Thank you, Chairman. Can everybody hear me okay? Hopefully, good, thank you. So good afternoon, my name's Chris Noble. I'm the Service Manager for Waste and Transport at New Forest District Council. Attached to the agenda for today's meeting were several documents. So there's a report setting out the background, the process that has been gone through in preparing the strategy, the implications of the strategy on staff, resources, finances and the environment. There's also the strategy itself, which is Appendix 1 to that main report. And then there's a series of further appendices, which is the results of the engagement exercise carried out by the Council in 2020, and some equalities impact assessments where we've looked at impacts upon staff and also the general public. So that's the sort of report pack. What I'm going to do for you this afternoon is present some slides, which are just going to pull out some of the key points and key issues from that sort of combined report pack. So hopefully that will be helpful in just sort of summarising what those documents are, what they say, and how we're proposing to proceed with the waste strategy. So I'll start with this diagram, and this diagram is the waste hierarchy. And the reason I'm starting with this is because it's been one of the key things that we've had to take account of in developing the new waste strategy. The hierarchy is a priority order of how waste should be dealt with. So the higher up the hierarchy you are, the greater the environmental benefit. And if you're managing waste closer to the bottom of that hierarchy, then the environmental and financial cost is greater. So we want to be moving more materials to the top of this hierarchy and having less located at the bottom. This diagram is important because it's also a legal requirement. So any organisation such as ours that is collecting and managing and dealing with waste has to apply the waste hierarchy to the waste it collects. So it's something that we have to take into account when developing our waste strategy and looking forward. So this slide covers why the Council is developing a new waste strategy and has brought that forwards to the committee today. So firstly, we have some local influences. So we know that our recycling rate at the moment is too low. You see on the slide there, NFDC ranked 174th out of 216 English local authorities. We absolutely want to improve that recycling performance. Best performer in England at the moment, as already alluded to, is St Albans Council, and they are recycling around 64%, so significantly higher than our current level of 34%. And in an area renowned for its natural beauty, we want to make sure that waste is managed more sustainably in the New Forest area and improve that recycling performance. The Council declared a climate and nature emergency in 2021, and as part of that we need to see how changes to our waste service could help reduce our carbon emissions. The Council's current service is based very much on a manual operation for our staff, and there may be ways to improve conditions for staff, which in turn may improve staff recruitment and retention for an important frontline service. Finally, surveys that we've completed have shown us that our residents want to recycle more. They want to recycle a greater range of materials, and that's something that we needed to consider as well. Secondly, we do not manage waste in Hampshire in isolation. We are a waste collection authority. There are 13 authorities in Hampshire with responsibility for waste collection. And there's also the disposal authority, which is Hampshire County Council. And it's the County Council that provide the infrastructure that we use to deal with our waste once we've collected it. So through a system of transfer stations, waste incinerators and recycling facilities. All Hampshire councils have now agreed to move towards a twin stream recycling service. And that twin stream service is collecting paper and card together and collecting glass, plastic and metal together. And to facilitate that, the County Council are building new infrastructure, and that includes a new materials recovery facility where recycling is sorted in Eastleigh. Finally, in 2018, the government announced a new waste strategy, and the government is introducing new legislation which councils will have to abide by. And that's aimed to improve consistency across councils, so get councils collecting the same materials in similar ways. That strategy also focuses on things like the packaging industry and how we can reduce packaging at a national level. Our current service is not compliant with those requirements that government have set out. And the best example I can give of that is food waste. So it will be a legal requirement in the future for councils to collect food waste separately at the curbside on a weekly basis, and that's something that we don't currently collect. So how has this strategy been developed? So the yellow boxes at the top of this diagram show the key influences on the development of the waste strategy. So the National Resources and Waste Strategy is that national strategy that I've already alluded to, and the key bit of legislation that's come out of that is the Environment Act 2021, and that's what will place legal requirements on councils, including ourselves, in the future for dealing with waste differently. There have been 2 rounds of consultation from central government on the issue of waste management in the last couple of years, and that's shaped their approach, which has in turn shaped our approach to our own waste strategy. We are at the moment actually awaiting the results of the last consultation that took place in 2021. Government have released some results from that consultation, but not all of them, so we are still awaiting some parts of that. As part of our partnership working with other councils in Hampshire, in autumn last year, NFDC approved a joint municipal waste management strategy, and it's that strategy which has agreed the new twin stream approach to managing recycling across the county. In 2020, the council produced a draft waste strategy. We did that working with some specialist consultants who helped us with some modelling to look at different options for collection. And we did that based on looking at high performing councils, looking at how they ran their services and how they achieved higher levels of performance. We learned that there are 3 key elements to a high performing recycling service. One is the collection of food waste separately at the curbside. The second is collecting a wide range of recyclable materials. And the third is greater containment of waste. The council ran an engagement exercise on the back of that preferred option, and we sought views on that proposal. And the feedback received from that engagement exercise has been incorporated into the waste strategy itself. So as well as the waste strategy itself, there are some other outputs from the work that we have done and will be doing, and that includes a waste reduction plan, which is appended to the waste strategy itself. And the other outputs shown there will follow as part of the implementation and planning for the strategy. So, for example, communications and engagement action plans. So in terms of the objectives, there are 4 key objectives within the waste strategy. To minimise the carbon impact of the service as part of our commitment to the climate change and nature emergency. To reduce overall levels of household waste as per the top of the waste hierarchy that I've showed earlier. And an increased quantity and quality of recycling. And the quality part means that we try and minimise contamination that's being collected as part of our recycling service. And finally, we need to make sure that we're compliant with any current or future legislation or regulation that government may bring in. In terms of actions within the strategy, this is split into 2 sections. So this first section is pulling out the changes to frontline services. So in terms of that regular collection service at Residence C, what are we proposing within the strategy? That's shown on the slide here. So introduction of wheel bins for general waste and mixed recycling, collection of waste and recycling alternating on a fortnightly basis, expanding the range of recyclables, so including a wider range of plastic, including pots, tubs and trays, aluminium foil, drinks cartons, like the Tetra Pak type containers as well. So ticking that box really in terms of expanding the range of recycling that people want to be able to do. It involves introducing reusable bags for paper and card, a weekly collection of food waste, and wheel bins for garden waste. The best way for me to illustrate all that is on the next slide, which shows how that service will look for residents. So I'll just take you through this briefly. So for collection of food waste on a weekly basis, residents will be provided with 2 containers, a smaller 7-litre container, which is generally kept inside the home for residents to deposit food waste inside the home. When that container is full, the contents are put into a larger kitchen caddy, which is generally kept outside and is the container that's put out for collection on collection day for crews to collect. Residents would also have a 180-litre wheel bin for mixed recycling. So that's the mixed recycling expanded range that includes those things I mentioned earlier, pots, tubs and trays, cartons, foil, etc. A 180-litre bin is smaller than the size of wheel bin that is seen across most of the rest of Hampshire and other parts of the country. And that does mean that they are easier to store and manoeuvre than the slightly larger bins that are in place in other areas. Sitting alongside that mixed recycling wheel bin is a paper and card bag, a reusable bag for containing those materials. That would be collected in the same vehicle as the mixed recycling, but in a different compartment, so those materials would be collected at the same time. General waste would be collected also in 180-litre wheelie bins, which again is smaller than the standard size. So looking over to Southampton, who have wheel bins, their wheel bins are 240 litres. So what we're proposing here is slightly smaller. We believe that gives them a smaller footprint, makes them easier to store and easier to manoeuvre, while still giving adequate capacity for households. Finally, our garden waste service is a subscription-based service. We currently use reusable sacks for that. and the proposal here is to move to a 240 litre wheel bin. I think there are 3 further things to say here at this point, sort of considering all elements of that proposed service. So households each week. Secondly, if garden waste is just excluded for a moment, the rest of those containers that you see on the screen there give almost 500 litres of capacity for residents per fortnight to contain all their waste. That should be ample capacity for most families to contain that waste. And thirdly, the service you see here is what we refer to as the core service. It's the service we'd like to see rolled out to most parts of the district. However, there are some situations where that service will not be appropriate. So examples of where that may apply are in the waste strategy itself. And what we will do is identify suitable and unsuitable properties as part of a property survey where we will look actually at where bins can be accommodated and where they can't. We'll also provide assisted collections to households that need them, and that may be in the case of old age or disability, or any reason why the resident cannot get their own container to the curbside on collection day. And that assisted collection involves one of the council's operatives going onto the property to collect the waste from that resident. And finally, where there are larger families, we've got in the strategy at the moment 5+ permanent residents in a household. That would trigger an assessment to see whether or not extra capacity was appropriate for that household. So if that household wasn't coping with the amount of capacity they've been given, we would look at that and provide more capacity where appropriate. So going back to actions within the strategy again, the strategy isn't just about frontline service change. It's a 5-year strategy that's trying to really improve the way we manage waste and do so more sustainably. So that's why we've included a waste reduction plan as part of our proposals, so we can focus on the top end of the waste hierarchy, and we'll work with partners to reduce waste and increase reuse. We also know we have to communicate to our residents and provide all the information that they need to participate in the service, out to other parts of the community, schools and things like that, to get those messages out through other partners that we can work with. In terms of implementation plan, there are some key points to bear in mind when considering the programme that we have for implementation. The first is that the ordering of vehicles and containers will need to be worked on in terms of the procurement and the delivery and the supply of those containers and the logistical exercise that will create for us. But secondly, our collection of the twin stream material is dependent on this new sorting facility that I referred to earlier that the County Council are building in Eastleigh. It looks most likely that facility will be ready for use in 2024, which is why in the strategy and in the report it's 2024 that we refer to as being the start date for this new collection scheme. Final couple of slides are just the recommendations that are at the front of the main report, which I'll just go through briefly now. So the first recommendation is split into several parts, which cover off each of those changes to the frontline service. So I won't read it verbatim, but as you'll see there, it includes the introduction of the food waste service. It includes the move to wheelie bins and alternate week collections, as well as the funding for the transition funding that's needed to mobilise and roll out the new waste strategy. The recommendations continue in that the executive head, in conjunction with the portfolio holder, would take the operational decisions to implement the waste strategy. That the progression of the strategy is on the understanding that new burdens funding will cover the increased costs associated with food waste collection. So just to clarify what new burdens means, that's central government funding. So this is part of the new burdens doctrine that the government has, which is if they place additional burdens onto a local authority, then that should come with funding to support that. And that's one of the things we're waiting to hear back from government on, with the latest consultation responses from government. We will continue to monitor progress at national and regional level. So that includes, for example, working with the county on the infrastructure to make sure that that's on track and is going to help us to deliver what we want to deliver through our waste strategy. And that we put some allowances within the council's medium-term financial plan for some of the scenarios that could arise in terms of funding and new burdens funding in particular. The other element of new income, which is referred to there in 1.5 on the screen, could relate to extended producer responsibility funding, which is funding from packaging producers to fund the collection of packaging for recycling at the curbside. That's something that government have put into their new legislation to support, and that's something that will be coming to fruition hopefully in 2024. And it's much of that funding that will help councils across the country to improve their recycling rates and roll out new waste collection services. Okay, that's my final slide, Chair, but I think I know there was a question from the public participation session, which I can try and address now if you'd like.
Yes, right, we'll do that, Chris.
Yeah.
I'll note it, Councillor Glass, for a second. Can we just deal with the questions that come from?
I've got two questions. One, in the proposals, it doesn't mention that we are going to make allowances, as in the report, for people who cannot house or handle a wheelie bin. Secondly, we had a very confusing leaflet put out. It's caused so much consternation that I think it should have been considered and put through committee before it went out. Because I showed this to people at the man shed. They're all elderly people. There is no mention of it that you can avoid having wheelie bins if you live at the top of a block of flats. In old people's bungalows where you've got nowhere to store it, it's causing a lot of concern, and it's badly written and doesn't give the full facts. So one, in the report that you're putting, or the recommendations of that report, it doesn't mention that we're going to have these allowances for people who can't handle wheelie bins for various reasons. So I think the recommendations are flawed. And also, this gives the impression that they're adopted. A lot of people thought this was going to happen. It's not recommended to happening. So I think that has caused a lot of misunderstanding. But my questions are we still going to have allowances for people who cannot house or handle wheelie bins? And if that's the case, why is it not in the recommendations? Thank you.
Councillor Glass, I did actually want you to wait 5 minutes whilst we dealt with our public participation, but let's get this out of the way now. Chris, can you answer that question for him, please?
Yeah, sure. So I think in terms of the report recommendations, we've got a recommendation in there to take it, operational decisions to implement the above recommendations. It does say within the strategy, it talks about various scenarios for people who don't have the storage, people who may need assistance with containers, and how we will look to help them. So that is included within the waste strategy document, and that will come to fruition through the property survey that we will carry out before the scheme's rolled out, so we can identify those properties where wheel bins will not be appropriate. So, for example, a block of flats would probably not be suitable for multiple wheel bins. So we. Sorry. Yep, so that's our assisted collection service. So if people can't manage with the containers we give them, we would offer the assisted collection service.
Can you make that clear in the recommendations, please? Because it's causing a lot of concern.
Councillor Glass, can I just ask to read page 49 in your agenda documents? You'll find that you have answers in there to which you refer. Thank you. Now, I need to get on with the rest of the discussion with the participants who've arrived.
Sorry to labour that, but
no, you've,
so much
you've made your point. Thank you. Can I just, thank you, Alan. Right, can I, Chris, could you deal with the questions raised by our two public participants?
Yeah, sure. So there was, I know there was a specific question about damage from a wheeled bin onto a vehicle. From our conversations with other authorities, that isn't something that seems to occur very often in other authorities, to the extent that it causes sort of damage to a vehicle that would lead to an insurance claim. That's not something that we've been familiar with in our conversations with others. And I think the question about who would be liable there is probably not possible for me to answer here now, because that would very much depend on where the bin was, how it was left, how far it had moved, all those kind of things that we'd have to look at as part of an insurance claim. But I think again, it's coming back to probably the overall benefits that we believe the wheel bin service will bring in terms of improving performance and increasing recycling rates. And whilst that is a consideration that you've raised there, we would have to look at that and take each situation on its merit, but it's not something we would expect to occur often.
Okay, right. Thank you very much indeed. Now, can I call on the relevant portfolio holder, who is Councillor Steve Davis, to address the panel on this subject?
Yes, thank you. Chris, do you want to take your light off?
Yes.
Thanks. Thank you, Chairman. This waste strategy is the culmination of 3 years of work by officers and by members from across the chamber to improve our frontline service. The objective is to manage waste in a more sustainable way and reduce our impact on the climate. We will do this firstly by giving priority to the prevention of waste, helping our residents to reduce and reuse more materials, and secondly, giving our residents the ability to recycle more materials at the curbside. This document provides the key details of the waste strategy, and with the appendices provides a very clear undertaking to bring our district in line with our partners across Hampshire by following guidance from central government. We have consulted with groups across the district, including town and parish councils, the National Park Authority, the Verderers, Forestry England, and most recently the New Forest Consultative Panel. And more importantly, our residents whose feedback from our survey in 2020 we have valued and considered carefully. The significance of the strategy cannot be stressed too highly as we move towards a more sustainable and greener waste collection, an improved recycling function, and I must stress, a cost-effective service. We all accepted change when supermarkets successfully removed tens of millions of plastic bags from circulation. Chairman, it is inconceivable now that the New Forest alone in Hampshire could contemplate a new core waste collection service that perpetuated the use of plastic sacks. Going forward, we will continue to communicate our plans to improve recycling and reduce waste, and we will undertake a comprehensive property survey of our district to inform the most appropriate collection method for our residential areas. Chairman, I commend the strategy and offer my gratitude to all of those who have worked so hard to bring this forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm sorry that the old waste policy has to go. It is being sacrificed on the altar to the climate gods as part of a vain attempt to reverse the climate to some halcyon climate of the past. It's the #1 policy objective as stated in big bold type of the first page inside the leaflet here. Tackle climate change, it says. The £1.2 million extra cost is a small part of the publicly stated annual cost to us all of £50 billion per year to reduce our evil CO2 emissions to net zero by 2050. That is why we have to increase our recycling rate to 55% by 2025 to comply with the government's edict. The government rules do not allow us to count the reuse of bottom ash from our waste incinerator or the electricity it produces towards our recycling. Our SAC scheme makes it impossible to identify which households are not complying with our recycling rules. Under the new scheme, they will be identified and re-educated. Scrapping our waste policy is just the start. Just wait until they shut off our gas and take away our central heating boilers and gas cookers. Of course, there are benefits from the new waste policy. The bins will be safer, as they won't allow sharp objects to poke out and injure the operatives. Also, they will be lifted and emptied automatically, so reducing the risk of back injury, which is very important. Then there is the downside. Bins are unsightly and can block pavements. They are bulky, heavy, and awkward to move, although they're smaller than those in Southampton. And they have to be cleaned, if you like the clean bin. And they have to be stored somewhere. Like many others, I don't like them. And if I thought I could keep our old scheme, I would vote to do so. I know we cannot change the climate, but as a council, we cannot win a fight with the government. Using sacks will not comply with the New Hampshire County Council waste disposal policy, which would likely cost us more money. We would also expect to be fined by the government for failing to reach the recycling targets. I'm also aware that quite a lot of residents like bins, people who vote for me, as they will stop spillage from sacks, which at the moment go out into the forest and when sacks are split open. Taking all this into account, I have reached the difficult decision to, reluctantly, support the new waste strategy today. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Tibb. Who's next? Councillor Wade, please.
I have a question for the officer that I want to respond to it, okay?
If you wish.
Firstly, can you just remind me, the new vehicles that take the wheelie bins, will they be able to take sacks as well?
Yes, they would. Yes, so we would be able to offer that hybrid service, if you like, where if most people were on bins and there were some properties that remained on bags because they didn't have room, then we would be able to accommodate that, yes.
So they will, that's good. Well, my first point, Chairman, is the paper itself should be called waste collection strategy, because there's nothing in any of the recommendations that detail the other aspects of dealing with waste. They're maybe in the strategy, but not in the recommendation that we're going to sign up to. And it may be worth remembering why we are in this position. Now, I know in Councillor Tipp's world, climate change that exists and everything's wonderful, so we can carry on what we did for hundreds of years ago, but we can't. We're in this position because this authority has ignored recycling for years and years and years and years, and we've got worse and worse and worse, and as was pointed out, we're 174. The people of New Forest are now faced with a radical solution to address that. Now, the officers have worked really hard, and members, don't be under illusion, they've worked really hard to come up a way to dispose of our waste in a more modern, more recycling friendly way. But we should never have been in this position where we've had such a radical change. One of the complaints about sacks is that vermin come into and break them open and birds come in to do that. Well, the reason we do that is not because we want to read the Leamington Times, good that it may be, it's because food waste is in it. Other authorities have been collecting food waste for years, but we don't. The officers rightly say 40% of all our waste is food waste. So if that is the case, then we are going to make significant recycling by doing it. So collecting food waste is a good thing. The Viola contract, which this council it has to deal with, which that's Hampshire County Council, doesn't recycle currently every recyclable product. But the government is going to insist that changes. And to be fair to this administration, although their efforts with recycling have been poor, and that has brought us to this state, the legislation from the government is making the options for this council very limited in what they can do. So the co-mingling is a good way to go. It's a good way to recycle. I haven't talked about bins. But what worries me about the paper, not necessarily the strategy, is that councils are process driven. And we are going to vote on something that doesn't tick all the boxes for me. Now, I know that Chris has mentioned that in the strategy, it talks about various, we're going to look at flats, terraced houses, accept that. But there are roads, I think of one straight away, where if you put wheelie bins in, there are no pavements on either side. If you put a wheelie bin down there, not only a car won't get through, a refuse truck won't get through it. There's one of them in my ward. the way councils work, unless you detail everything so there is no manoeuvrability, it won't get done. There'll be problems later. We will come into trouble with residents. Say, good, yes, you can. You know, that I want to see in the recommendation details of how we're going to look after the people in the forest who can't have a wheelie bin. We have an ageing population. It should be there in black and white. And we need residents of the New Forest, to be able to say, well, I can't take them down my street. Okay, well, you can have 3 sacks to represent the bins as it is. So I'm not comfortable with this without that in it. But perhaps one of the biggest bugbear for me, and I've been on the panel since the very beginning, so that anyone on the panel will know I'm not going to say anything I've never said before. When I first looked at this, there was no waste minimisation at all. Waste minimisation is the top of the hierarchy, as Chris has said. Beginning, the council is looking at it. Badger, 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 and then it comes up. There is nothing in these recommendations about waste minimisation. I take minimisation limited bin, because then they can't put in more rubbish in it. Well, what will he do with the rubbish after that? It will go fly tipped. It will go somewhere else. Families create rubbish. Kids create rubbish. It doesn't just disappear because we give them a smaller bin. I take the point that 40% is food waste. I trust that's right. So 60% of it, but 60% for different families is different pounds of waste. The waste minimisation part of this is too weak, in my opinion. And again, this is nothing new, so I'm not saying anything I haven't said all along. If we minimise waste, we haven't got to collect as much. To be honest, Chairman, the strategy has all the words in it. What I want to see are the actions in the recommendations, because these recommendations do not cover all the areas that will allow me to support them. Because we need the people of the New Forest to know they'll be looked after and cared for by the new strategy, but also to be educated on waste minimisation. I want to see things how we work with New Forest suppliers, New Forest companies, everybody that generates the waste that we all use, because we use it, you know, all of us, members of the public, you know, we're the ones putting it in the bin. So we need to deal with that first. You deal with the problem, then you deal with how you get rid of the residue. We're dealing with the residue without looking how to deal with the problem first. And that's a fact. And I know Councillor Titt's thinking, oh, we're going to spend millions trying to save the planet. Well, actually, I think saving the planet's worth it. And I think we should. So, Chairman, I am not comfortable with the recommendations. And I know the officers have worked hard, and this is lots of criticism of you. Please don't take that, because it isn't. Because I know how hard effort you've put into trying to get this administration out of the big hole it dug itself with dealing with waste. And that's where the problem lies. But we must put in these recommendations defences for people of the New Forest, and we need to really show we're serious about waste minimisation, not just paying lip service to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wade. I think to a certain extent you may be mixing up national policies that are intended to deal with, shall we say, the materials of waste, as opposed to at local authority level where we've got to collect it. But I understand your comment. Councillor Benison is next, please.
Not unless we let Councillor Garth go first, and I'll pick up the end.
Well, he's had one go already. Okay, Councillor Garth, please, would you?
Thank you. I agree with what Councillor Wade was saying. We have to move forward, and those that can use them need wheelie bins. But I would like to propose that we amend the recommendations to make it clearer that although it's in the small print, we want to make it in the large print, that we're going to take the options for those who can't handle wheelie bins, and we're going to take waste minimalisation into account. They're all in the programme, but I'd like it in the recommendations to make it crystal clear, not way back in the small print. Thank you.
So, Councillor Benson.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, I'd like to deal with the properties that are difficult to reach. I live in one of those, so I may not be able to receive the core service, which is regrettable, but I live where I live. Our report tells us quite clearly surveys will be carried out to identify these areas. Households with no or limited external storage, households which currently use communal waste recycling facilities, households in areas only accessible by specialist vehicles. That's me. I don't have the normal vehicle. I have what's called a cage vehicle to pick up my stuff. So I might still have to have the plastic bag, which is regrettable because we all want to get rid of this plastic. I think we all agree that we've been reliant on plastic far too much. It's everywhere. It's in our seas. It's everywhere where we don't want it. So if we can do away with plastic bags, that has to be a good thing. So turning to what we're talking about, which is food waste for the first time. We will have our food collected every week for the first time. So that removes all the smelly things from our residual bag. So hopefully the birds and the animals will not be wanting to get into the bin. Probably wouldn't want to get into a plastic bag if we were still going down that road. But the important thing is that we are reliant on the council to provide us with a MRF, which means we can put more things into our, I'll call it clear bag, because that's what we all know what we're talking about. And if we can all do that, then less of that stuff is going to finish up at the incinerator. So because we all want to put more into our clear bag, we need a receptacle, because we're going to have to contain this stuff for 2 weeks. We need a receptacle that can easily hold that amount. Otherwise, it won't be 1 bag a week. It'll be 2, 3 or 4 just for recycling. So more plastic bags. Now, I don't know about you, but I already use a dustbin to hold my black bag. So when this scheme comes in, and if I am fortunate enough to be able to have one of the wheelie bins, I will replace my dustbin with the wheelie bin. So, okay, a lot of us might have an awful lot of plastic dustbins that we need to get rid of. That's another issue that we're going to have to deal with down the line. But we're not saying that this is all done and finished with today. There are things that will roll on that will have to be managed. Now, minimisation. It's not within this council's ability to stop producers selling us stuff in plastic and cardboard and everything else. But we hope that with trying to encourage us, the residents, to put less into our residual bin and more into the recycled bin, that we will start saying, do I actually want those 4 apples contained in a plastic sheet and a tray? I'd much rather have them loose and put them in now, as we are being given now, paper bags. We've gone back to paper bags. Do you remember when we said, we've got to stop using paper? The trees, we're cutting down so many trees, we must stop using paper. So what do? We started putting everything in plastic bags. Now the wheels come full circle. Now we don't want plastic bags, quite rightly. So actually, sensibly, we're going back to paper bags. So there's a lot more. Let me deal with the disadvantages. I live in a rural place. I live in the forest. I don't particularly want to see wheelie bins stuck out everywhere. As I drove down through Totton today, it was obviously collection day, and there were piles of bags everywhere, still waiting to be collected. And yes, once those are collected, they've all gone. But let's hope that people who want where they live to not become an unsightly mess will take in that wheelie bin so that they don't just leave it out there for anybody to knock over or whatever. We have to do something, and with the help of county providing us with a new MRF, and with help of a system that can deal with the extra amount, and remember our chaps have got to get this stuff on the lorry, so at least the bin will help that by have a lifting mechanism. I think we all really need to work together to make sure that this does work, and with those people that, with those properties that don't fit the system, unfortunately, the council is going to have to drive a dual system, which isn't going to be cheap. You know, there's basically two systems for some people. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you, Chairman.
Right, thank you, Sue. Tony.
Thank you, Chairman. A couple of personal points to make and a couple of points on which I'd like some reassurance. Personal points first, I do have great sympathy with some of the points our public speakers make. And I find myself agreeing regrettably in that sense with Councillor Tip that if there were a suitable alternative, I would certainly be interested in looking at it. What I see from all the evidence we have is that we're not going to have an alternative to going this route. Going this route, again, I would agree with a colleague that I think Alan's point, we must, if we accept the recommendations, put in some caveats. Information and education is going to be key to getting public support, and I think we should be very concerned on that front. But the two issues I would like some reassurance on. One is that the prospect, certainly within Ringwood in some areas, of having accidental damage caused by wheelie bins, and in that I include things like personal injury or whatever, there is potential, however remote it is, there is potential for considerable claims. And I can see that there may well be, in the end, some debate between insurers as to whether it is the authority or the individual responsible. But can we have some assurance that this authority will have some insurance cover against such liabilities, albeit that might develop into further arguments, but nevertheless some assurance that we have insurance. And the second point on which I'd like some reassurance, am I right to believe that we still await guidance from central government on green waste potential, and can we therefore have an assurance that no matter what that results, this authority will maintain a green waste facility?
Thank you, Councillor Ring. As I've no more questions, Chris, could I ask you to respond to the questions raised so far?
Yeah, certainly. So with regard to the sort of reassurance around insurance, if that makes sense, yeah, I mean, obviously the council has its insurance policies that cover any of its liabilities. I think the question that would have to be asked is around that liability level, whether that is with the council or with the resident. And again, without a real sort of precedence or a real life scenario to consider there, that's probably a difficult one to answer. But what I can say is the council has, in all its activities, the required level of insurance cover. Secondly, around central government, yes, you are correct in that one of the things we are still waiting from government on is garden waste. The initial government suggestion from a few years ago now was that garden waste collections should be provided free rather than chargeable. The vast majority of... Nothing's free, is it? Well, yeah, quite. It has to be obviously funded in some way. Free to the resident at point of use, I guess, is how you could word it. That's one of the things we're waiting to hear back from. Vast majority now of councils across England charge for that collection service. We can't second guess what government are going to say, but the garden waste service will be provided and will remain regardless of that decision. The impact on us would be of a free service is that we would no doubt get more participants in the service because it suddenly moved from a chargeable service to a free service, and that would have a resource impact upon us to fulfil that service, as well as obviously the impact from the loss of income. But again, what government have said in the past is that a free garden waste, if that were to be put into law by central government, would be classed as a new burden, and therefore councils would be compensated, if you like, by central government for that lost income. Thank you. If I could, just on garden waste, if I may, because it's relevant to a point made from earlier. We've talked to, in the last month or so, we've had a couple of conversations with councils in Hampshire who have moved from reusable bags for garden waste to wheelie bins, and they've seen that their subscription numbers in the years after that have risen rather than reduced. So we haven't got any evidence around the move to wheelie bins and the and a subsequent reduction in subscriptions or reduction in customer numbers. And probably the other thing to say there around that additional container is this clearly doesn't apply in all situations, but in most cases, people who require a garden waste collection have an element of outdoor space because they have a garden and they have that's why they have the requirement for a garden waste collection service. So if you follow that sort of logic on, I'd suggest that most garden waste customers would have room to store that garden waste bin because they have the outdoor space that is generating the garden waste. Again, like all elements of the service, if there's a scenario where a wheel bin isn't suitable because there's not the room, then we would look at an alternative container, which in this case of garden waste would be to continue using the reusable sack, but we would obviously be looking at the wheel bin as the first sort of level of priority for that.
All right, Chris. Okay. Thank you very much. Right, there's no further questions from panel members. Chris?
Could I, if there are no further questions, just probably a couple of points from the public participation?
Yes, please.
Is that okay?
Yes.
So I've just made a note of a few points that were put across in that opening section, which I don't think we've necessarily covered in the sort of subsequent questions that we've had. So I'll just pull out a couple of thoughts on those. So around our recycling rate, yes, I think in the strategy, 55% is the target that we're looking at for when this scheme comes into place. I think we'd clearly like it to be higher than that. We'd like to get to those higher performance levels. I think 55% is an initial target. I think after that, we'd look to really push on and try and get to those higher levels of recycling. And that, you know, we can look at further materials. What will also help is things like more funding from central government around extended producer responsibility to collect more materials and expand those range of materials even further. We know that our current service, which is the sack-based service, has a cost to it. There are some numbers in the cover report around how much that clear sack service costs to supply clear sacks and black sacks to our residents. And when we've looked at the initial outlay for wheeled bins, which does have an upfront cost, when you spread that cost over the life of those containers, which in the case of wheel bins could be 20 years, the actual annual cost to supply containers for waste and recycling to our residents would be lower than the current cost. Because those sacks number 10 million per year, we have to purchase those and we have to distribute them to residents, and that is an expensive part of the service. And those plastic sacks, when you take into account the content within those plastic sacks, the actual plastic within them, again, over the course of the life of a wheelie bin, there'll be less plastic actually in use and in circulation through the wheel bin service than there would through the sack service. I think I've covered the garden waste. I think the survey that we did as part of the engagement that we did in 2020, I think gave us some really good feedback, some really good information, which we've woven into the waste strategy. So that's in particular things about considering the impact upon elderly or disabled residents. It's about making sure we do that property survey and that we do that in the right way to make sure that we're not providing bins where they're inappropriate, to make sure we get that right. So I think that comes into the property survey, and that feedback from the engagement has really helped us to do that. I think on vehicles and congestion, at the moment we have 2 vehicles visiting each property per week on the same day, because we have the black sacks that get collected by one vehicle and the clear sacks that get collected by another. So there's 2 vehicles currently visiting every property, and that obviously has an impact in terms of emissions and in terms of numbers of vehicle movements. Whereas when we move to the alternate week system for general waste and recycling, that will be 1 visit per week. So we're taking out a vehicle movement from that because we're either collecting general waste or we're collecting recycling. So in terms of vehicle movements, that should reduce. And with the specialist consultants we worked with, they did a carbon analysis, which looked at the likely emissions from the service as a whole, and they believe that the proposed service will overall lead to a reduction in emissions. Again, that's included in the cover report. I think, if I may, just one more point, if that's okay. Sorry. Yes, and food waste being collected weekly, obviously as well. So there'll be a food waste visit and either a general waste or recycling visit to each property. So there is that additional vehicle movement from the food waste, sorry to be clear. I think in terms of some of the other comments that have been made around the recommendations, if I could just highlight that obviously in 1.1 within the recommendations, It does recommend the adoption of the waste strategy 2022 to 2027 in its entirety. And within the waste strategy, we have a clear approach to develop that policy around the surveying of properties and the provision of alternative collection systems where appropriate. That is also included in the cover report at 9.5. So it gives some examples of where we will vary the service. So that is quite clearly stated in the cover report. For example, properties with no side or back access, rural areas, flats, the issue around free roaming animals, assisted collections and other things. So that is included in the cover report. And likewise around waste reduction and waste prevention, there is a waste reduction plan that is part of the waste strategy. So by adopting the waste strategy, as in recommendation 1.1, we are by default also adopting that waste reduction plan for us to work through in the future. I think that was
all right. Thank you very much, Chris. Very comprehensive. Right, as no more panel members wish to speak, sorry, Councillor Osborne.
Yeah, I've got concerns actually. I mean, I can see that the way we're moving towards recycling by using a wheelie bin is okay, because it's going to go every 2 weeks. Removing the food waste, obviously, we all know it is the problem from people that have contacted us. But what I am concerned about is the general waste. What's in the general waste that's going to sit there for 2 weeks? That really does concern me as to, in this sort of weather today, what we're going to be looking at from people. So that's one of my basic concerns.
Thank you. Chris, you could probably answer that one. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, the benefit of the weekly food waste collection service is that anything food-wise will come out of people's black bags and will be collected separately once a week. So that should reduce any issue with odours or smells or anything within the general waste wheelie bin. But it's a good point that you've made there, because actually when you ask yourself what will still be in people's general waste, when you think that we're going to be pulling out the food waste, adding the wider range of plastics, including plastic film and plastic pots, tubs and trays and other materials as well, there should be very little left in people's general waste, which is why the alternate week collection and the 180 litre wheelie bin for general waste works, because most material now will be coming out and going for recycling, and that's how we'll get up to those higher recycling levels.
I think I've said it before, that, for instance, chicken wrapper, I complained about it when they first started putting more and more plastic and bases on it, and the Waitrose basically said to me, we've been told the chickens leak. So packaging like that's going to be in the general waste. There's also going to be the medical, the nappies, the sanitary, all those other things that are going to be sat there for 2 long weeks. That really does concern me. Although we don't live in a hot country all the year, that's going to be sat there in some people's wheelie bins for 2 weeks instead of 1. I look down, my road, I've started to take an interest in all this, and I can see that some people have not made any effort to reduce their waste. Personally, I've gone down to 1 black bag, 1 recycled bag, but I can see, other people have got 4 or 5 black bags outside, and they haven't really got big families. So, yeah, we do need to be talking to people a lot more about making sure they do use this new idea. But also, we don't want to be too draconian, do we? So, as I said, I'm very concerned about the black waste. The other I can accept.
Not a response?
I think the only other thing I could add is where people have got any particular medical need, we can provide a separate clinical waste collection, because we offer that service as well. So anybody who is producing a type of waste as a result of a medical need, then we can look at that weekly.
Children nappies?
Yeah.
That's not going to be, and the black bag goes to the burner. So I feel as though there's not really an issue with it.
Yeah, sure. So I think, obviously as part of our waste reduction plans, then we'll be promoting the use of reusable nappies rather than disposable nappies. And there's ways in which we can support people to do that, providing them with information, etc., to move to that. But again, going back to learning from other areas, other parts of the country that have done this, that doesn't tend to be a significant issue. A wheel bin is a sealed, sort of contained unit. So in terms of odours or smells or anything like that, anything like that should stay within the bin. So that's probably all I could say, really. I think the key thing is keeping the food waste out of the wheelie bin into the weekly food waste collection service.
Right. Thank you, Chris. Okay. Councillor Tipp, you wanted to ask another question.
So I was just going to respond to Councillor Osborne's very, very pertinent point, I think. And even in the recycling bin, there will be tins, and not everybody washes their tins out thoroughly, like me. Some people will leave bits of stuff in the bottom, a baked bean tin or a tuna tin, and those things in a fortnight are going to stink just the same. So I think that's a very, very valid point.
Thank you, Councillor Tipp. Sorry, Councillor Wade again, please.
Me, thank you. Yeah, well, sort of in answer to that, the other thing this authority has been exceedingly poor at is educating the public. We have one of the lowest, smallest amounts of public relations for waste costs of any council in the country. So it's not surprising that people don't know how to manage their waste properly. So another thing that's missing here that I think has been talked about, may well be in the strategy, because I'm sure it is in the strategy, that we need to publicise and educate the public how to manage their waste in the new system. And don't be under any illusion, with numbers alone, this is going to go through. And it will improve recycling. But we don't want to throw the proverbial baby out with the bathwater. We need to ensure that the people in the forest are protected, educated and helped to use this the best way. And really that needs a considerable amount of effort. Years and years ago, when this council was run by a different party, we had a waste minimisation committee, and we had an officer whose sole responsibility was going around talking to schools, going to events, talking about how we deal with waste and recycling and how people managed in those days was much better. And we need to go back to that level of publicity, which has been ignored for God, a long time, many years, because this is a dramatic change. And we will be selling the people of the New Forest short if we don't help them how they deal with this. But, and I go back to my earlier point, until I see it in a black and white recommendation that everybody has voted on, I won't be comfortable that these things will, even though they may be in the strategy, will be followed to the degree that I believe the people of the forest deserve. And I still think the waste minimisation is not strong enough.
Thank you, Councillor Wade. Did you want to answer that, Chris?
Just wanted to say around the education piece that an example of where we'll be upping our game in that respect will be through that transition period to a new service. We are very clear that we'll need to communicate with residents to prepare them for this service change. So when we talk about the £1.1 million in one of the recommendations about the transition cost, that includes funding for increased levels of communications. It includes, for example, waste advisors, who would be people who would go and talk to the public and let them know about the change in the service and provide that education and sort of awareness piece. But also within the waste reduction plan, we know we've got some actions in there around working with different community groups and things, which will be done through the additional resource that we've outlined in the waste reduction plan to provide that level of extra engagement that you've spoken about, whether that be with schools or other community groups. So it's very much a part of that waste reduction plan. It's also something that we know other councils do really well. So when we have looked into the likes of Pembrokeshire Council, for example, and others, that education and communications piece is clearly very important to them, and it's one of the things that helps authorities get to those higher levels of performance. If I may, just very quickly on the Pembrokeshire sort of question, because I know that was raised earlier. We have looked at what Pembrokeshire do. They do have a high level of recycling performance when it's measured. A couple of things to say about that. Firstly, there are differences, I'm afraid, between the way in which recycling rates are calculated in Wales compared to how they're calculated in England. So it's not always a fair or direct comparison that can be made. So, for example, in Wales, they do include the incinerator bottom ash recycling within their performance figures, which gives them all a bit of a boost up the league table in terms of their. Okay.
So without scrap recycling in that one.
Okay, well that relates to a target, which yeah, okay, that's fine. But in terms of their published recycling rate as it is at the moment, that would include an element of incinerated bottom ash. Okay. There are other examples of how those rates are sometimes different between the two authorities, but leaving that to one side, they have a different mix of containers there. They also have a 3-weekly general waste collection. That's one of the things that drives their high level of performance, and they also have a high density of household waste recycling centres within Pembrokeshire, which boosts their overall sort of recycling rate and recycling performance. I think the only other thing to add is around their collection system is they have actually more collection containers than we do. They don't have all them than we are proposing to have in the future. So they don't have wheel bins, but they do have numerous boxes and bags, which on collection day, in terms of the numbers of containers that are actually out for collection, would be a greater number than what we're proposing. And that obviously has an impact in terms of residents having to store those containers and those containers then being on the street on collection day. So we agree that the Pembrokeshire model is good in that it it obviously has a very comprehensive recycling service, and that's one of the key elements that we're looking to improve in the future in terms of the range of materials and things that we collect. But our view from the work that we've done so far is containment of waste is key to providing that higher level of recycling performance. When you look at the top 10 performers in England, they all restrict residual waste. And at the moment, our collection of residual waste, general waste in black bags, is unlimited. And that doesn't lead to a high level of recycling performance.
Right. Thank you, Chris. Next is Councillor Bennison, please.
I just wanted to come back to the point raised earlier about smelly tins and things that haven't been washed out. And let me give you an example. It was a number of years ago now that I asked a friend to come in. We were going on holiday. I asked a friend to come in and look after the cats, which was no trouble to her. When I came back, I was amazed to see every tin washed out and left on the draining board. And I thought, my goodness me, I don't wash out my tins. She'd washed out every single tin, and there it was, all stacked on the draining board, all to go into the bin, absolutely pristine clean. So I think this is going to be incumbent on all of us, actually, to do a bit more for ourselves. I don't wash tins out, but maybe, once this service comes in, it might just occur to me to actually put something clean into the bin because it's going to be there for a couple of weeks. What hardship is that? I think we all need to take some responsibility for what we throw in our bin, what we just casually just stick in the bin and say that's no longer our responsibility. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bennison. And I think probably the final one, please, Councillor Class again.
Thank you. I'd like to just enlarge slightly on the point that Councillor Wade made. It's not very often we agree, Malcolm, but if we're going for education of people, I'd like to just point out on this leaflet, it caused an awful lot of confusion. And I want to make sure things happen smoothly, but this is a wonderful attempt of, when I lecture on management, not assuming that everyone knows what we know. Because believe it or not, the average voter hasn't read this paper in detail. That's why I asked for a motion to clarify the points that the recommendations are going to council to make sure these points are very obvious. So as not just us understand it, the members of the public, the press and everybody understand what we're proposing. Because this leaflet, when I handed it out a couple of times at small units, caused controversy. Not because it's a bad proposal, because it's not explained with all the little caveats. So my proposal still stands, if I can have a seconder, that we clarify this on the proposals that are going to go to council, because I believe it will ease its way through council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Ring.
Simply, if that is a proposal, I'll be happy to second it.
Chris, do you think this is something that could be absorbed into the...
Yeah, so in terms of education, the education and the comms plan, we could make that clearer in the recommendations and about the importance of that.
1.1F of the recommendation provides for provides for £1.1 million to include temporary staff, communications and education. I think that's, okay, that just needs to be emphasised.
Yes.
Thank you. Right. Okay, I think that's it for our panel members. Just for a short moment, we have one or two members of the council here. An opportunity for you if you wish to make or say anything on the subject. Councillor Sevier, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I came along because obviously I've spent 3 years sitting on the strategy group looking at all of this. When I first went along, I thought, oh, I'm a bit dubious, but thanking the officers specifically for all the information that they brought out. So the numerous questions that we asked. So in the end, I was happy to support this because I think we have to move forward. So I felt I had to say something, having driven all the way from Fordingbridge. Just obviously to thank the officers. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sevier. And no other councillors? Right, well, we've got to the point whereby we need to address the recommendations, which are number 1 on your agenda paper, items 1.1A to F, noting the embellishment of F in terms of the communications, education, of the use of the £1.1 million we have in there. Right, members of the panel, I propose that the recommendations under 1.1A to F, I'll take them in bulk because they are all interlinked with one another in one way or another. If one falls, all falls, so that in itself would not make any sense out of what we're trying to do here. So for members of the panel then, could I have hands raised for approval of the recommendations 1.1?
So to clarify, this is recommendations they take to Cabinet. This is
what
the
yes.
panel recommends to Cabinet.
Yeah. My apologies. It just reinforced the fact that this is a recommendation to Cabinet, that we approve of this recommendation in front of you to go forward to Cabinet, who will then discuss it. So to come back to it then, we're starting. Can I have the panel members whether in agreement with the recommendations in front of them? Yes. Any against? Right, that's abstentions. 2. Thank you, panel. That goes through to the Cabinet for their consideration. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. And thank you, Mr. Kent and Mr. Hubbard, for coming along, giving your time. Very kind of you. Yeah. Right, I'm going to break for 5 minutes, ladies and gentlemen, so that we can reassess. Members of the public who wish to leave may do so. Don't need to stay in. You might fall asleep if you carry on much longer. So you may leave whilst we rearrange and settle down, and we'll deal with item 5. Give it 5 minutes, please. Thank you. Starting with agenda item 5, annual performance and provisional budget outturn. And Cheryl Perry, could I ask you to deliver a report, please?
Thank you, Chairman. So this report provides an overview of performance and delivery of the corporate plan for 2021-22 and sets out provisional outturn results for the general fund and housing revenue account. You'll see there's 2 main elements to this report. There's the annual performance report itself and the budget outturn. I'll talk through the annual performance report first of all, which is Appendix 1. As with previous years, the annual performance report begins with a foreword from the leader, followed by information about the local area and an infographic which has been included to show some of the key achievements across each of the portfolios. We've then provided more detail on each of the portfolios, including the work that's been undertaken to contribute towards the Council's key priorities and performance against indicators at the bottom. So in terms of the relevant portfolio pages for this panel, you can see the portfolio pages start from page 134 onwards within the agenda pack, and these form a backwards look on the achievements and progress over the past year. Whilst I won't go through all of the detail now, I did want to touch on a few of the areas. So the leader's portfolio notes the significance of the climate and nature emergency declared in October 2021 and how it will influence our sustainability agenda. This section then goes on to explain how we're incorporating sustainable measures into our assets, such as EV charging points and solar panelling at our town hall. In terms of planning, regeneration and infrastructure portfolio, which is on page 135, an update is provided on progress against the local plan. You'll see details of the amount of planning applications and telephone calls into the planning service, with a significant increase in the number of decisions determined within nationally prescribed timescales, as shown in the key performance indicators section at the bottom of the page. The portfolio is planning for the green infrastructure strategy and continues to require biodiversity net gain on all new development plans. Performance against key indicators has been monitored via the dashboards throughout the year, and the most recent relevant information is included at the bottom of the page. I'll now briefly cover the Environment and Coastal Services portfolio on page 140. This portfolio will play an important role in delivering the Climate Change and Nature Emergency Action Plan as described in the text. The text also provides details of our current collection service, which caters for 82,000 properties and collected over 60,000 tonnes of household waste in the 2021-22 period. Garden waste was reinstated in March 22 following disruption caused by the pandemic and HGV driver shortages, with a record number of garden waste customers recorded for the period. The portfolio report also references the significant amount of work undertaken to develop the new waste strategy, which you've heard about today. Elsewhere in the text, you will see information about the installation of electric charging points, resulting in savings of almost 8,000 kilograms of CO2. There was urgent works to replenish the coastline after this year's winter storms, management and inspection of the 760 beach huts along the coast, and partnership working on the development of projects to protect our changing coastlines. Again, you will see performance information represented, which again has been monitored through the dashboards brought to this panel. Later on in this pack, there's a forward-looking specific actions and achievements section, with the relevant pages being 143 and 146 for this panel. For each portfolio, you will see that the specific actions the portfolio aims to take over the next year are at the top, with supporting achievement indicators at the bottom. These are all updated annually to ensure that they reflect the current activities, whilst also contributing to the overall priorities of the portfolio. The progress against these actions and performance against the achievement indicators below them will be monitored via the portfolio performance dashboard throughout the year and will then form part of next year's annual report. You'll see there's no targets included at the moment. The work is ongoing at the moment to get those in place, and you'll get an update at the next panel when you see the Q1 dashboards and how this has progressed. So having gone through some of the activities of the portfolios that report to the panel, I just wanted to touch upon section 5 of the main report, which gives the overview of financial performance for the General Fund, Capital Programme and HRA, and is supported by some further detail at Appendix 2. For 21-22, the Council set a General Fund net budget requirement of 19.291 million. During the year, 4 financial monitoring reports were presented to Cabinet, which highlighted a number of budget variations. There are too many to list here, but full details are available in those reports, set out on a portfolio basis, should any members require some additional information. Appendix 2A of the report shows an outturn net operational spend of 17.724 million, a saving of 1.567 from the original budget. The closed down process continued after this report was produced, and additional adjustments have since been made, reducing the year's net underspend to 1.472 million. The report will be updated to reflect this change in position before going on to Cabinet in July. This outturn position has allowed an additional 622,000 to be transferred to earmarked reserves, largely to cover projects rephased from 21-22, and a net additional 850,000 to be transferred to the Capital Programme Reserve to fund future years' projects. Appendix 2B shows an outturn capital programme spend of 25.646 million, and that was an underspend of 10.5 million against the original budget. This was principally due to an underspend of 6.2 million in the Housing Development Strategy Programme and the rephasing of 2.47 on the Crow Lane Industrial Site project and 2 million on the new project at Hardley. Again, full details of all variations during the year were included in the monitoring reports to Cabinet. That concludes my report. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Cheryl. Members of the panel, any comments to make about a very comprehensive list of successes, I think? Malcolm, yes, please.
I have a question, actually, on the money we've put into earmarked reserves. Does that differ substantially from the figures we quoted when we looked at the budget process earlier in the year, and if so, by how much?
Unfortunately, I can't answer that one right now, but I can go to the finance team and confirm for you.
Just drop me an email.
Yeah, that's fine.
We'll see how it's changed.
Yeah, we'll do that. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Charlotte. Any other member of the panel wants to say anything? Right, in that case, we'll turn to item number 1 on page 127. It's recommendations. 1.1, it's our recommendation from the panel. This going to Cabinet again, I would presume. So, members, are we agreed in recommending this performance and professional budget outturn to Cabinet? Those in favour? Thank you. Those against? None. Abstentions? None. Thank you very much. That's carried. Thank you, Cheryl. Item 6, panel. I'm afraid that this was essentially going to be delivered by Steve Cook, who's in charge of this particular subject. Regrettably, he has been surrounded by a family of COVIDs and has to self-isolate. So, as he is a wealth of all knowledge, I propose that we actually delete item 6 at this time and let it come back to our next meeting. Are we in agreement, please? Yes? Agreed. Thank you. Let's go to item 7 then. This is portfolio holders' reports and dashboard. And the start of my list, Councillor Edward Heron, please, leader.
Chairman, thank you. I haven't got much to say this afternoon. Obviously, you've had a long meeting and a hot day, but the only thing I'd just like to mention to the panel is I am pleased to say that we have now appointed someone to the Climate and Nature Emergency Manager post, Dr. Saskia McGrath, and she will be joining us in September.
Excellent. All right, panel, okay with that? I'll go on to the next portfolio, and on the list, I've got Councillor Andrews, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Just a brief report, as most was said, somewhat rapidly. I'll just enlarge on it. We have 6 live sites of developments covering various towns across the district. We have Totton, Lymington, Milford-on-Sea, New Milton, Ringwood and Fordingbridge, and that is a total of 565 homes. Presently, 18 of our other strategic sites in the local plan have or will reach the pre-application stage, and work is continuing to reach that stage in 2021-22. Now, the Biodiversity Net Gain. Now, this is an approach to development. So for any new developments, developers are required, wherever possible, to protect existing habitats and ecosystems and to ensure that any habitat loss is identified and mitigated in the early planning stages. Our planning team is supporting developers and landowners to identify potential projects. The planning department, as you heard, are receiving about 1,000 telephone inquiries a month, and the determination of planning applications at this time is within the nationally prescribed timeframes. The building control department remains incredibly busy and continues to meet its current market share. There have been recent changes to building regulations which came in yesterday, and we have put in place a programme training our surveyors to ensure that they are fully compliant with the new fire safety regulations, and we can be seen now to be responding quickly to government guidance and regulations. Delivering the green infrastructure projects, we have finished the survey of New Milton, and in the summer we'll be surveying Fawley, Blackfield and Calshot. The aim is to make a network of multifunctional green space and other green features, urban and rural, which can deliver quality of life and environmental benefits for communities. And it does include parks, open spaces, playing fields, woodlands, even allotments and dog walking areas. We continue to work closely with Partnership for South Hampshire, and I attended a productive workshop last week. We're making good progress as we prepare for our next local plan. Our plans for the regeneration of Totton are moving on. Community engagement specialists have already been in Totton asking residents about the issues, or the problems they feel are affecting Totton and what they would like to see in the future. Their comments will be recorded and made into a visioning document. The results are due in late summer, and this will be an important part of the ongoing process of regeneration. Chairman, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Andrews. Any questions from panel? No, thank you very much indeed. And finally, Councillor Steve Davis, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I won't dwell too long on rubbish at this point in time. I think we've done that for today.
We've had enough rubbish for one day, thank you.
But I will, and I won't touch on car parking either. I think we've pretty much up to speed with what's going on there in terms of our electrification of our charging points. However, I would like to touch on coastal. As you know, New Milton, I wish. No, the New Forest is partnered with Bournemouth BCP, looking at the Christchurch-based strategy.
Yes.
Part of the Christchurch-based strategy, of course, is understanding the rising sea level, and it's very much understanding the implications of our coastal communities and certainly our inland close to the sea, such as Keyhaven. It's quite ironic that a couple of years ago, no, it wasn't. It seemed like 2 years ago. It was in fact last April when I first met the BCP guys. They were talking quite clearly about the rising sea level, how they have evidence of that within Christchurch, with Muddyford Harbour, Christchurch Harbour. But after last week, they did a very good open day presentation at Milford-on-Sea. That was attended by quite a few people in this room, I was pleased to see, where BCP and New Forest, along with partners, displayed a number of maps and areas of concern along our coastline. Now, New Forest is not going to be immune by any means to coastal erosion and the implications of rising sea levels. And there was a very good picture there that showed that. It was quite ironic that, I think 2 weeks ago, almost a year after we started this work with BCP, that the Environment Agency actually came out through their chief exec and declared that rising sea levels will cause issues for our coastlines around the country. Obviously, New Forest itself wasn't picked out. It nearly always the typical areas of Somerset and the Fenlands that will suffer most immediately. Although coastal erosion is happening quite aggressively in some areas, particularly in East Anglia. Yeah. It's something we're taking on board as part of the Christchurch-based strategy, and I'm confident that within probably, I think it would be due next year to come up with a list of changes that we would like to make. It's been very well reported in the Echo. Not so well reported necessarily in the Advertiser and Times. We would like to make it a bit of a shocking story, but the fact is we have 100 years until the sea levels rise to 1 metre. But they're going up, and it's going to have an impact, and we need to understand now and put in place protection. And that's what the Christchurch-based strategy and the Hurst to Lymington strategy will work on. So more information as that comes out. If Steve Cook was here, he could talk eloquently about the subject, but he isn't, so you've had me. That's all, Chairman.
It's refreshing to have the subject delivered so simply and quickly, as opposed to our usual montage of excessive, well, no, don't pass that. Steve Cook, he's fine. He's a knowledge of all things, and I hope he recovers. I was wondering with rising sea levels whether he's posed his questionable, but I hope not. Malcolm, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I've got to turn around here. Yes. Excellent work being done in the west of the district. But the east of the district has a coastline as well. And parts of it actually have flooded already, even without the rising temperature from global warming and climate change. And up here, NFDC needs to be a little bit more active in working to protect those areas. And I think that is a fair comment to say, because I know our own community has been flooded. So I've got the pictures, so it's not imaginary. So I think we could really appreciate the same level of care and attention to the east of the district that you have given the good folk of the west. I think that's a fair thing.
Councillor Davis, you'd like to answer?
Thank you. I think Malcolm makes a very good point, and he's quite right. We are blessed in the west I've always said this so many times, but seriously though, Malcolm, the Environment Agency is fully aware of the rising sea levels of all the areas, all the way up to Totten. I know that I even touched on this with Claire and Steve Cook recently. Totten does flood. We certainly know that your manor floods, not least when there's a high tide, plus, of course, a nice southeasterly storm. It's not good. However, the Environment Agency are aware. Steve Cook made a presentation here, I think it was last spring, Steve?
I think so, yes.
Where he covered all the aspects of our fairly unique and diverse coastline. And he did touch also on your patch. So it's never far from our minds. I can assure you of that.
That's good, as long as it's never far from using your patch.
All right. Councillor Andrews.
Chairman, I'd also like to say that the development down in Fawley is already having sea defences put in as part of the development. So, Councillor Wade, you are not forgotten.
No, that's what we usually do. It's impossible to forget it.
Really? All right. Councillor Tipp, please.
Holder accept that a lot of the erosion problems of the cliffs down at Milford and Highcliffe and places like that are due to land water running off, not sea level rise at all. And does he accept that the tide gauges don't show anything like a metre of sea level rise by 2100? This is purely computer modelling. Thank you.
Well, the last point, no, I don't accept that. I've seen their modelling, and quite frankly, if only you had been at that presentation, you'd have been able to ask the questions and seen for yourself graphically how the experts in this field, and I'm not one. My geology stopped in Yorkshire, but basically the actual fact is that sea levels are rising. It is documented, so therefore the projection is 1 metre by the end of this century.
I'll do that.
But before you come back and throw it back at me again, I will just say that I do accept that cliff erosion, particularly in the area that I've studied a little bit, which is Barton-on-Sea, which of course is as you know, a suburb of New Milton. That's for Christine's benefit. But basically, yes, basically the groundwater drainage has not helped. The state of it has not helped the cliff subsidence there. I fully accept that.
You know, getting back to this point about sea level rise,
yeah.
This is a computer model that gives us 1 metre. The tide gauges currently do not show anything like that.
Yes, I can come back on that. The rate of change will accelerate as the temperatures rise. So I'm afraid the tide gauges will show that they have increased, and Christchurch, Bournemouth, or BCP actually showed the evidence of how the sea levels have. They haven't risen very much. It's only about 1 centimetre so far this century, but it is accelerating away. I'm sure I can find some stuff and send it to you, Derek.
The south is sinking and the north is rising.
I don't know that one. I know there may be something that. Malcolm.
I must actually support the portfolio holder in this. I don't know, Councillor may not realise, but we have an Arctic Ocean and an Antarctic Ocean, and they're shrinking. And the reason they're shrinking because the ice is melting and it's turning into water. Now that water goes into the sea, and that's one of the reasons that the sea is rising. Right, so, you know, and that is well documented that the ice is retreating at a vast quantity each year, and that's where the water's going. So, you know, in 100 years' time, we probably won't be there, but somebody will be standing up to their wellies in water because of this. So we need to do something.
But Malcolm, isn't some of the ice actually freezing or frozen on the water, and then when that melts, of course, the ice has displaced more water than it actually is. So that is okay. Oh, yeah. So, there was the other thing that was put forward by Councillor Benison, that isn't the south of England lowering and isn't the north of England rising as far as a tectonic plate.
Isn't that what we're
you say?
Actually, Chairman, can I just say that that's actually quite funny.
Can I say it's a help, Malcolm? Yes. He's got a sense of humour, that's all right. Right, okay. I think we're done with that one, are we, ladies and gentlemen? Yes? Thank you. Right, let's go to the next item on the agenda, which is our work programme. You've all got a copy in your papers. I don't know of any particular additions as we speak, but it is what it is. Waste strategy again next time in September, team, so you'll be completely versed in it well and truly by then. Might have one or two extra answers, I think, from Chris, you know, if the government says something, I think. There we are, 8th of September here, and then there's the one in January and following with the one in March. Okay, well, there's no changes to that. Final item on the agenda. Before I do that, I've been forewarned that I have not dealt with item 1 on our agenda, which is the minutes of the last 2 meetings of the 10th of March and the 16th of May. But of course, the memory of the members of the panel is so great that I can say, do you agree that both those reports are an accurate summary of the meetings that took place at that time? We're agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much indeed. That corrects my error. And the final part was anything I thought urgent at this stage, which there isn't. So thank you very much. That is, I send the meeting is empty, finished. Thank you very much.